and welcome to the Of Interest podcast. I'm Gareth Vaughan from interest.co.nz. Unless you've been living under a rock, Donald Trump, the President of the United States of America, is very, very hard to avoid. Trump's words and actions are both unpredictable and omnipresent. So how do we make sense of what Trump says and does and what he might do next, and especially from the vast distance of New Zealand? To discuss this, I'm joined by David Cay Johnston. David is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist who's the co-founder of DC Report and also a professor at the Rochester Institute of Technology. He has probed Trump's business activities and written about the affairs of Donald Trump since the 1980s. So somebody with a lot of knowledge and expertise on the life and times of Trump. So David, hello to you and welcome and thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me back, Gareth.
So look, I'm keen to talk about some of the domestic issues and also the international picture, which is very complex at the moment. But I guess to kick off, you know, there's been a lot of water under the bridge since Trump was re-elected as president in 2024. It seems a lot longer ago than it is. I mean, he's only been back in office for a little over a year, but it feels somewhat longer. I'm just keen to get a sense of what you think. You know, what's his support like within the US domestically now? Is it possible to gauge his popularity with the electorate? And I mean, with so much going on, what are American people making of it all?
Well, America is a very big, complicated country, and it's not a simple answer to that. But his approval ratings, depending on the poll, and I'm limiting myself here to the legitimate real polls, are down in the 30% range. They're well underwater. He has seen a couple of cracks in his MAGA base, which is about 20 to 25% of the adult population, over two issues. One is Trump ran promising he would release all the Epstein files, and he's now fighting, as he would say, fighting like hell to make sure that that doesn't happen. And of course, if it's a hoax and you're innocent and the files prove you're innocent, as he says, why would you fight to hide them? Then secondly, he promised no more endless wars. He specifically has promised never to attack Iran because it wouldn't be in our interest to do so. Well, look where we are now. Those fissures, however, it's not clear how damaging they will be. There have been a number of by-elections in America, and they've gone generally very badly for the Republicans. It appears, for example, that Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was the Trumpiest of Trumpers until she broke with him, may be replaced by a Democrat who is a retired general. So election-wise, Trump has to be deeply worried about the 2026 midterm elections, and he and his minions are doing everything they can to interfere with those elections. Steve Bannon, his former advisor, has said, we're going to have the military and ICE at polling places. That would be illegal, but they can be 1,000 feet away, and that can be plenty intimidating. Trump wants to federalize the elections, have the national government take them over. The Constitution says each state shall run its elections unless Congress passes some law to the contrary. Well, he's not going to get a law passed, but that doesn't mean he can't interfere. And of course, the murders, and that's what they were, the murders of the two people in Minneapolis have aroused a great deal of anger and upset. And at the same time, Gareth, the American economy is doing not at all well. When Barack Obama was president after the end of the Great Recession, to the end of his term, so basically all but a year of his presidency, he created a little over 200,000 jobs a month. I mean, presidents don't create jobs, but 200,000 jobs a month were added on average in his presidency. Last year, under Trump, we added 15,000 jobs a month, and we just lost in February 92,000 jobs. So we're going in the wrong direction on jobs. The prices of commodities have fallen. Wheat prices are down more than 50%. We've lost the soybean market to China, to Australia, Canada, Argentina, and Brazil, and that appears to be a permanent loss. So lots of problems in America economically. That hasn't quite hit hard, however, yet.
Yeah, I mean, I can recall when he was running for re-election and Joe Biden was president, Trump and some of his supporters were making a lot out of the price of eggs, and this was all Joe Biden's fault.
It was all the fault, Gareth, of avian flu that forced the slaughter of 1 in 4 laying hens. And then once the new laying hens were raised, guess what? The price of eggs fell back.
Yeah, okay. But I mean, those cost of living issues, I mean, they're still quite prominent here in New Zealand, especially with what's going on with the oil price right now. Are they still significant among Americans, your everyday Americans? And also, what about his tariffs? I mean, are people blaming him for pushing prices up through tariffs? Is that an issue, a problem for him?
Well, a lot of people are blaming him for it. Others are not. There are a lot of people who believe his nonsense that tariffs can replace the income tax. All around the world, we're seeing inflation in developed countries, and it grows out of a whole series of broader issues that are here. But, Trump said that there would be no inflation. He said, we're going to see prices fall 500%, 600%, 1,500%, all of which, of course, is mathematically impossible. And what we're seeing is inflation rising, not a lot, but rising. Trump claimed we had the highest inflation in the history of America under Joe Biden. Not even close. I mean, I've lived through the highest inflation in American history as a young man, and it was in the middle teens. Under Biden, it was very briefly touched close to 9% and then fell right back down. But the economy is a major issue for Trump, and it is not going well for him under his policies. And when he's asked about it now, he just tries to deflect to get away from it.
We'll come back to some of the domestic issues later on, but I'm keen to get our teeth into some of the international issues as well. So we touched on tariffs. I mean, obviously, the tariffs he introduced on imported goods last year have had a big effect in a lot of places around the world, including the US. Our exports in New Zealand, obviously, it's been an issue for us. But, this year we saw the attack on Venezuela. So obviously the US captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and flew him back to New York. Now we've had the attack on Iran, and Ayatollah Khomeini, the senior one, was killed. Now, I mean, both these regimes and these individuals, it's very easy to say have been very bad for the people of their country. But is it accurate to say that Trump has greenlit attacks on these countries and these two leaders for the good of Venezuelan people and the Iranian people?
Oh, no. In fact, in Venezuela, we left the rest of the Maduro regime in place. His deputy is now the head of the country. Similarly, Iran, for all the horrors of the last 47 years and the horrors of all the period under the Shah with his secret police, the Savak, we weren't doing anything to help the people of Iran. What Trump is doing here is trying desperately to deflect attention from the Epstein files. He absolutely needs to get away from that because, of course, if the Epstein files show that he's completely innocent and it's all a hoax, why wouldn't he want them to be released? Why is he fighting so hard to hold them back? And we know why, because some of the young women have testified under oath that there are videotapes of Donald Trump raping them. And the government is holding that back. And by the way, those tapes would per se be criminal materials to just look at, but there's an exception for law enforcement. Donald believes he is special. I said in 2011 that if Donald got to the White House, he would never leave and he would be our dictator because he has no understanding of law, responsibility. He spent his entire life as a white-collar crime boss. He's the head of a third-generation head of a four-generation white-collar crime family. In fact, one of the subjects I'm going to teach in the fall is white-collar crime in America. And Donald doesn't see the lines you and I see. Oh, that's Denmark's protectorate in Greenland. No, I want it. It's mine. And the only issue is, how do I get it? And he's been that way his whole life. He has cheated his workers, his investors, his vendors. He even cheated people in one of his casinos, a story I broke almost 40 years ago.
So, I mean, Iran, it's a complicated situation. And he, as you say, he promised not to get in. He criticized other presidents for getting into these endless wars, obviously Iraq, Afghanistan in recent years. Recent, going back a little way now, but in the last 20 years or so. So, I mean, what's the end game with Iran? I mean, if he wakes up tomorrow morning and is like, oh, right, okay, enough of this, I'm getting out. I mean, Israel's probably not going to walk away. The Iranians aren't going to forget what's happened. So, how bad could this get?
Oh, this could get very bad and last a very long time. They went into this war with no plan. According to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who may well be the next Republican nominee for president, the Israelis informed us they were going to attack Iran. And the U.S., he says, concluded that the Iranians would turn around and attack American bases, which I think makes perfect sense. And so we joined in the attacks. But is it regime change? Is it protecting Israel? Is it stopping nuclear weapons? Is it the oppression of the Iranian people by the Ayatollahs? Every day there's a new explanation and justification for this war. They say they want the Iranian people to rise up. Well, a lot of Iranian people liked the Ayatollahs. We've seen pro-Iranian demonstrations in Pakistan and other places. So it's important in the Middle East to know the difference between Sunnis and Shias. And if you ask Donald that, he would turn to talking about the drapes in the White House because he doesn't know anything about that. But for 1,400 years, there's been this split in Islam. Iran, the most sophisticated country in the Middle East, is ruled by Shia. The other countries are Sunni, but they all have Shia minorities, and they ruthlessly oppress them. So there are no good guys here. They're all bad guys. They're all dictators. They're all murderous to their own people. Trump embraces MBS, the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia, who put $2 billion into the Trump-Kushner crime family and has been doing a lot of other things for them. He, back, I think it's 12 years ago now, had 39 imams publicly beheaded for the crime of praying for a better government. So you're just talking about one viper's nest against another viper's nest here, but not having a plan for what you're going to do. Is saying, well, maybe we'll send in ground troops. The U.S. does not have the military assets built up to go do that. Iran has 1 million trained soldiers. It has a lot of bench strength among the theocracy. If they kill the second son of the Ayatollah who was assassinated a week ago, guess what? They'll pop up another leader. So this is a war without a clearly defined purpose, and it's a war of choice. And the Democrats are certainly going to do their best to hang it on Trump's neck. I don't think you'll see a ground invasion. I think that would be foolish. One thing to watch for is there's credible reporting now from several news organizations, beginning with the Washington Post, that the Russians have been giving targeting information to the Iranians. Here's where there are American soldiers you can kill with your missiles and your drones. And Trump just blows that off. I don't know. I don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about it. It's his standard answer to things. That should be, in my view, thoroughly investigated. And if there's any truth to it, it should lead to I don't want to have a nuclear war with the Russians, to be clear, but it really should lead to higher sanctions, deeper sanctions, not, as Trump has just done, the lifting of sanctions that will allow the Kremlin a one-note economy to sell more oil and to sell it at premium prices, providing desperately needed foreign earnings to the Kremlin.
As they continue to wage war in Ukraine, of course, too.
Yes.
So Trump's also threatened Cuba recently. You mentioned Greenland. That seems to have gone quiet for now. But, I mean, should we anticipate these further sort of military adventures?
Oh, I think that it's highly likely we'll see some other things. He's also talked about seizing the Panama Canal. He has cut off all fuel to Cuba. And he said, well, we're gonna take care of Cuba. I'm going to put Marco in charge of Cuba. I mean, Donald is thinking is that of like a boy in junior high school. This is not a deeply contemplative, educated man. He is appallingly ignorant. One of the first things I learned about him when we first met, and we've spent hundreds of hours together over the years. Greenland, I think, unlikely to see military intervention. He's succeeded in causing chaos within NATO and a lot of concern about NATO. which benefits first and foremost Vladimir Putin. But the Panama Canal, I think that's still on the table, and Cuba is absolutely still on the table.
So I mentioned that I was keen just to talk about how a country like New Zealand should sort of react to and sort of deal with Trump. And one situation I wanted to sort of get your take on was back in January, Trump was, well, actually, the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell came out and, said Federal Reserve independence was under threat from the administration. And New Zealand's relatively new Reserve Bank Governor, Anna Bremen, who just joined, who's Swedish and just joined at the end of last year, signed a letter alongside other central bank governors in support of Powell and central bank independence as a concept, which is something that New Zealand politicians usually strongly support. However, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Winston Peters, came out and criticised Bremen and said the Reserve Bank has no role, nor should it involve itself in US domestic politics, and the governor should stay in her New Zealand lane and stick to domestic monetary policy. I mean, this to me, it's interesting because there's a bit of an issue in New Zealand is how should we and our leaders, how should they treat Trump and react to things that Trump does? And we're obviously a trading nation, and there's the tariff issue. And if we upset him, would he increase the tariffs on New Zealand exports to the US? So I'm just wondering, what's your take? I mean, how do you think a country like New Zealand should respond to Trump?
Well, first of all, on the central bank issue, a central bank that is under the thumb of its leader, prime minister or president, is not going to have any credibility whatsoever. There's a reason that central banks are set up with insulators so that you get the best professional judgment of people steeped in economics. And in the case of the US, the central bank has a two-part role, often forgotten. One is to have a stable currency, to have minimal inflation. You don't want no inflation because prices are frozen. You don't want negative or disinflation because that's a horrible nightmare of people not spending. You want to have a moderate low level of inflation. But you also want full employment. That is the other responsibility of the Fed in the United States. For the head of the Federal Reserve, or the functional equivalent of it in New Zealand, to speak out in support of Jerome Powell, I can understand why that would upset the administration. On the other hand, it's a voice of support for independent, trustworthy central banking. And that, I think, is per se a good thing. The tariffs that have hit wool and lamb chops and other things from New Zealand, those were all illegal tariffs. The U.S. Constitution only gives Congress the power to tax. In fact, one of the things I teach and very few Americans know is the reason that in 1787 we threw away the first American republic and replaced it with the Constitution was first, foremost, and overwhelmingly so we could tax ourselves. The original government had no power to tax. It was government by bake sale. A government that can't tax is not a government at all. The revenue of the state is the state. That's my modern update of Edmund Burke. And so there isn't any essential ingredient the U.S. needs from New Zealand. We need your humanity. We need your smarts in dealing with weapons held by ordinary citizens, things like that. So the key object is to not become the focus of Donald's wrath, because he could say, well, I'm going to prevent anyone from moving to New Zealand or coming from New Zealand. I'm going to ban Air New Zealand. He could do all sorts of things to make trouble. So my fundamental advice would be, just try to stay off his radar. Go on living your lives.
Fair enough. Back to the domestic scene. I'm curious to ask you your take on what checks and balances are actually left on Trump, because obviously the way that the US system is set up, there's supposed to be checks and balances on the president through Congress, through the courts and the Constitution, for three examples. How much influence do these sort of bodies and individuals in them still have?
Well, under the U.S. Constitution, the president is essentially the errand boy of Congress. He is there to carry out whatever Congress instructs him to do and to be commander in chief of the military. Donald Trump sees himself as the all-powerful dictator. And when I said that he would see himself that way in 2011, I was literally mocked by some prominent people in American political journalism. I'm a policy guy, not a politics campaign guy. And lo and behold, in 2024, Donald Trump said, I run the country and the whole world. And he has since made further statements about this. He tells the Iranians he should pick their leader. He thinks he's the world's dictator. He hasn't consolidated his power even in the US, but that's his goal. Totally consolidate his power to be totally unaccountable. Unfortunately, my track record on predicting things about Donald is holding steady at perfect. Not one mistake. In baseball terms, I'm batting 1,000, and you only have to hit about 270 to be a big multimillion-dollar star. But I completely got wrong Congress, and the Republicans control the House and the Senate. Nothing is happening. They're having trouble passing bills that just rename post offices in somebody's honor. They're not doing any checks and balances on him whatsoever. And Trump got really lucky in the stolen secret documents case. He got a judge who basically has acted as his protector. He's had the Supreme Court issue ruling after ruling, which is helpful to him, although one of them I think is going to blow up in his face. And the checks and balances system isn't working, plain and simple. Now, if the Democrats are able to regain control of the House and possibly the Senate, all this will come to an end. They will promptly begin investigations of him. They'll start subpoenas. They will refer for prosecution people like Attorney General Pam Bondi. And we'll see a whole different environment, which is why, in addition to knowing the Epstein files, if they provide irrefutable evidence that he is a child rapist, should surely mean the end of his presidency. I have to say that I've had people contact me and say, oh, no, Donald stopped doing that, and God has forgiven him, and so we must forgive him too. And not just one or two letters like that. That and the prospect that his presidency will effectively be over if he loses control of the House and Senate, those are the things that are weighing on his mind first and foremost. And very, very deeply disturbing to him.
So the midterms are obviously, I think it's November the 3rd, so they're a few months down the line. There has been quite a lot of talk and speculation around whether he is going to want to allow them to operate as they normally would in the US. How concerned are you that they may not go ahead, or there may be a lot of intimidation of voters or anything like that?
Oh, we're already seeing this happening. They're very seriously seeing this happening. There have been all sorts of efforts to strip people from the voter rolls. They've seized 2020 ballots from Fulton County, Georgia, which is essentially metropolitan Atlanta. There are efforts to intimidate various people. There's litigation by Trump surrogates going on. The effort to suppress the vote is absolutely crucial. The Republicans can't retain the House of the Senate if we had universal voting. You know, over in Australia, I don't know if you have it in your country, but in Australia, it's mandatory voting. Now, in reality, everybody doesn't vote. And the government every once in a while grabs somebody and goes, oh, Gareth Vaughan, well-known public figure, he didn't vote. We're going to prosecute you to make a point. But in America, the winner of every presidential election since 1788 has been didn't vote. So there are ongoing efforts to suppress the vote. One thing that the Republicans are trying to do is pass a law that everyone has to have a verifiable photo ID, and women who changed their name when they got married will have to re-register to vote. That's not going to pass the Senate. But it's also a good indication of Trump doesn't know what he's doing, because the women who tend to take their husband's name tend to be more conservative. They're not women like my wife, who was a charity CEO for 30 years, who kept her own name.
So it's going to be potentially tumultuous midterm elections by the sound of it.
Oh, and I think the primaries, we have primary elections in America. We just had one in Texas, and we're going to see a lot of tumultuous activity in the primaries. We're going to see a lot of disputing people's right to vote. Hopefully, huge numbers of lawyers will volunteer a few days of their time to learn election law and then make themselves available on election day, because lots and lots of people in the southern states particularly are going to be turned away or denied the right to vote.
So one thing I'm interested in is who does Trump actually listen to these days? Who has influence over him? Because there has been evidence in the past that people can have quite a lot of influence over him. What's your
Well,
sense on that?
yeah, Gareth, that's absolutely true. And I will tell you, having negotiated with Donald many, many times, I always walked away with at least what I wanted to get and sometimes more, because he's a terrible negotiator. It's all part of his con artistry that he tells you he's this great negotiator. He's not. The last person who spoke to Donald always has significant influence over him. This has been true his whole life. It's something his own executives used to tell me about all the time. They'd spend a lot of time getting him to do something, and then somebody else would get Donald, and all their efforts would go down the drain. He clearly listens to Vladimir Putin. I mean, the White House has made that clear. Vladimir Putin talked to him the other day, and what Vladimir says is true. And remember, in 2018 in Helsinki, Trump said he didn't trust any of the 17 American intelligence agencies, but he took Vladimir Putin at his word. Other people who seem to have some serious influence with him include his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, who has pulled him back from some things. I'm sure we will find out someday that the reason he went to see the return of the bodies of the first 6 soldiers in Trump's Iran war was because Susie told him he had to do it. The last time something like this happened, he went and played golf. And he had planned to go play golf, and I think she persuaded him that was not a good idea. But she's mostly concerned with optics and achieving what she wants. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the anti-science, utterly dishonest head of the federal government's health operation, which is a huge part of the United States federal government, he has great influence with him. Pam Bondi, his attorney general, who behaves like his personal lawyer, clearly has a lot of influence. And then there are various donors out there who Donald listens to. You put money in Donald's pocket, he'll listen to you.
So back in 2018, I interviewed you, and I think at that point you'd published one of your books about the first couple of years of Trump's initial presidency. And at the time, you said there is no good ending to this story. And you described Trump as a clear and present danger to the safety of the whole world. I'm guessing that you stand by those comments, given what's happened since. But also, how does it end? What is the end game here? Does he walk away from the presidency, in your view?
Well, at the moment, the United States is a dictatorship. It is not fully consolidated, but it is a dictatorship. Whether we restore our democracy is not clear at this point. We may cease to be a democracy. That's why they're buying at sometimes gross premium prices these empty logistics centers, warehouses, to house people. There's no reason to house hundreds of thousands of people in cages if you're simply going to grab people off the street and deport them. You would only do that if you intend to make mass arrests and put people into a version of a concentration camp.
Who's buying the warehouses?
The Department of Homeland Security has been buying these abandoned warehouses. In one case, and I think this is very telling, they bought a building that had been valued when it was occupied at $24 million. It's empty. It's been for sale. Nobody wants it for several years. And the U.S. government is paying something like $120 or $140 million for it. And lo and behold, when you dig through the ownership several layers, you find a Russian oligarch at the end of it. There's lots of very easily uncoverable corruption going on in this administration. So if Trump is voted out in 2028 and he leaves, well, he can't run again, although he said the only time Donald has ever said publicly he made a mistake was 2 years ago when he said, yeah, I never should have left the White House in 2021. That tells you where his head is. So he doesn't want to go. If we get a new president who represents the American Constitution and is faithful to it, then this will be a horrible chapter in American history, and we'll see how honestly or dishonestly we deal with it. But there is a clear and distinct risk that that won't happen, that we will have him seize power and been able to stop him. The key to that will be if he starts replacing many more, and he's replaced a lot already, general officers in the military. That is the classic sign of a dictatorship, is replacing the general officers. And there are always captains and majors and colonels who, for their own vaingloriousness, will subvert their government in return for power. And has he fired an enormous number of highly competent senior military people, sometimes just because they're women rather than men, or they're black instead of white. So we will have a huge fight in 2028. How this will play out, I don't know. I do not believe that J.D. Vance is electable as president, primarily because to the MAGA crowd, his wife, who was raised in India, is not white, and they're livid about that. I mean, the MAGA crowd basically are racists at their core. Marco Rubio is highly likely to be the Republican nominee. Is Marco Rubio going to turn out to be, as the child of people who lived and prospered under the dictator Batista in Havana, going to turn out to also be a dictator, or is he going to turn out to be a patriot? And there's no way to know these things. It is significant that we've had these large No Kings demonstrations in America. They aren't nearly big enough, according to the research of political scientists, to overthrow the government, to get the government to change. But they may grow in time. The next one will be at the end of March. It will still be cold in large parts of the United States. So let's see what happens over the summer with those. Clearly, opposition has been awakened, and the most hopeful thing that's happened is in Texas. Democrats have not held a statewide office in Texas for more than 55 years. In the primary election for U.S. Senate, governor, and other races last week, more people turned out to vote as Democrats than ever before, and there were more that voted that way than Republicans. And in Texas, if people voted according to how they say their political affiliations lie, then for every Republican, there's 1.5 Democrats. The joke is that Texas is not a Republican state that is red. It's not a Democratic state, blue. It's not a purple state. It's a no voting state because so few people turn out to vote. And that's the challenge for the Democrats. Can they organize and turn out the vote? And if they can, then we will restore our democracy. If they can't, the United States will simply become a huge autocratic nation, not unlike Xi's China, MBS's Saudi Arabia, Putin's Russia. And that would be a terrible thing for the whole world.
David, finally, I just wanted to ask you, I know from interviewing you in the past that you were a registered Republican. Are you still?
The important word there is registered. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat, but yes, I changed and vote in a minority party's elections these days. And all that registration to me means is that's whose primary vote I get to vote in. I've made it a practice since I've lived in New York, where we have 4 political parties, not 2, to never vote for a candidate on the Republican or Democratic Party line. I'm not one of those journalists who say, oh, you're a journalist, you shouldn't vote. I don't think that's appropriate, but I appreciate and understand people like Len Downey, the former editor of the Washington Post, who have that view. He's a friend of mine. But where I live in Rochester, New York, the primaries among the Democrats are of absolutely no interest. You can know what's going to happen in advance. Having the right to vote in the Republican primaries, they're much more interesting, and you see a variety of candidates pushing different ideas. But I've never been a Republican or a Democrat. I'm not happy that I've spent the last 10 years of my life tied up in political matters about Trump. I did so only because, as many other people have said, I know Trump better than anybody else in journalism, and it was my duty to do this. I had a whole plan laid out for my later years. I'm 77 now. And when Trump came down that escalator, I immediately turned to my wife and said, he might make it to the White House. I have to drop what I'm doing. People don't know who he is. They don't understand who he is. And I'm one of the very few people who does. And to me, it was a patriotic duty.
Well, look, thanks so much for sharing your expertise and your vast experience of Donald Trump with us. Much appreciate that. It's David Cay Johnston, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, who co-founded DC Report and is also a professor at Rochester Institute of Technology. And I'm Gareth Vaughan from interest.co.nz with another episode of our Of Interest podcast.